Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that means it's time for the time-honored BookTube tradition of Wednesday reads. I am not going to keep doing this. I just want to show you some books that I am working on right now that I've either just finished or I'm about to start. And once again, we'll break it up evenly. We'll break it up evenly to 3 books that I have just recently read and 3 books that I am planning to read next. And the first one that I have just recently read is a romance novel. It's this, Snowfall on Lighthouse Lane. It's part of the Honeymoon Harbor series by this author. One book of which I have read. I've looked through my romance shelves here. I didn't have a whole lot of time. I looked through and could not find it, but I'm fairly certain that I read the first one of a previous volume in this series. I think I mentioned it yesterday. It's a soldier who's come back to his small town to heal mentally from his tours of duty and also from being shot. He wasn't crippled. He wasn't shot in a major way, but he did receive a wound. And the clear implication in the book is that there's a lot of the wound was the least of his problems. That he wants to stitch back together some sense of himself, and he comes back to his small town to do that. And there he runs into our main heroine. Jolene Wells is forever indebted to the mother who encouraged her to fly all the way to sunny L.A. and a world away from Honeymoon Harbor. But her mother has a cancer scare in this book. And also floating around the cancer scare in the course of it being resolved one way or another, floating around that cancer scare is also the longer term scare of this feisty, independent, outspoken woman will someday need assisted care, and then worse than that. And that element, that kind of quotidian element, I mean, a soldier coming back from the war who's been wounded and needs to heal, or a mother who gets a cancer diagnosis or a cancer scare, those are big dramatic things. Those are the sorts of dramatic linchpins around which romance novels often turn. And the thing that amazed me about reading this, and I remember that it amazed me about the first one too, is how oddly in the background those big dramatic things feel. Instead, the joy of reading this thing is just the day-to-day. It's just the normal life in this little town, which is captured really well. All the big personalities, all the little personalities, the small snafus, the big issues. There were points in this book where I almost forgot that I was supposed to be rooting for a romance. Instead, I understand now. Every time I read one of these things, not just this, but any novel, there are a whole bunch of romance novels, contemporary romance novels now that are set around a location. The location is the theme. And every time I read one of them that's well done, and this one was really well done, I realize again that is no accident. It's a feeling of coming home. It's a feeling of being invested in the quotidia that is the main appeal of books like this, if they're done well. And this was done really well. I really enjoyed it. And then the next 2 are biographies. I read 2 biographies. The first one is this one. It's Andrew Murphy's biography of William Penn, the convert to Quakerism, the friend of King James, and the founder of Pennsylvania. And this is the first William Penn biography in quite some time, and I knew ahead of time going in that it has been touted as scholastic improvement. That there was a whole bunch of ground clearing new research and reading that had to be done on the primary sources of Penn's life, and boy oh boy was that true. This is a landmark. Every future William Penn biography will need to use this book as not only a reference but a starting point. This is just it's a perfect example of exactly how you do that, of how you take the previous somewhat creaky biographies from decades ago, you take all the primary materials, you take a new outlook and lots of new research into all the strands of Penn's life, and you write a definitive life. This is a perfect example of how to do that. And I was worried when I went into this that, I mean, usually if a biography has all that going for it, sometimes the writer will think that's enough, and it's not. You also need to tell a great story, and this author does. I was very relieved when reading it that this author has a lively interest in William Penn and all the people around him, and is right on hand with all the little facts. Like the William Penn, of course, converted to Quakerism, and became famous, but in his own day, the most famous Quaker, and that has led to all sorts of urban myths about how the man on the Quaker oats container, that famous Quaker, smiling Quaker with his hat that some of you from America will know. The rumor has always had it that is William Penn, and then the author says, "Nope, the Quaker Oats people say it's just a guy named Larry." And the author also reminds us that William Penn and his wife are among the very few non-Americans who were ever granted honorary American status. There's only a handful of them. You can count them on the fingers of one hand. And William Penn is one of them. And his wife was the first woman. William Penn and his wife were granted American citizenship by Ronald Reagan. But Penn led a complicated life, deeply enmeshed in the politics and the religion of the England of his day. This book makes no apologies for and does a great job in telling an English life of William Penn, which is the only real thing you can do. I mean, he is famous for founding an American state, an American colony, and then an American state, but nevertheless, his life was mostly English. And this book makes no apologies for telling an English life of William Penn. I really recommend it. If you're interested in colonial studies, if you're interested in restoration studies, this is a landmark. This is the kind of biography that people are going to be referring to. They're going to have to refer to it forever because this author is present all the time. He digs into everything and is present while he's studying it. That's always wonderful. So I do recommend it. What are you doing, Bean? Your friends are going to want to see you. Huh? Oh. Oh, it's not easy being a star, is it? Then the next book is also a biography. And I really enjoyed it, but I can't say any of the things that I just said about the William Penn book. This is Hilary Sperling's biography of Anthony Powell, the novelist. And one of the ways that you can always tell when you're going to enter into a more partisan affair than, for instance, the William Penn biography, is if your biographer refers to her subject by his first name. And throughout this book, Powell is Tony. And that has an effect. It has an effect on the writer who's writing that 100,000 times in the course of a manuscript, and it has an effect on the reader as well. And this particular reader, I really enjoyed the book. Hilary Sperling is a fantastic writer. Fantastic ear for dialogue, fantastic ear for pacing. You will keep reading, even though this is the mostly sedentary life of a guy who mostly wrote for his entire life. You would think that would be boring. You will keep reading. This is a very good narrative exercise. And I really liked it, and I can recommend it for that, especially if people are interested in an insider's look at Anthony Powell's life. But it didn't strike me as definitive. It struck me as biased. I finished the book with two strong impressions. And I don't know how fair either one of them is because I'm not an expert on this author at all. I've read his books and really like them, but I know most of what I know about his life I was learning in this book. And I came out of the book with two strong impressions, and they were kind of at war with each other. The first one was that Hilary Sperling really liked her subject, and that she really didn't make any bones about this being a thoroughly sympathetic portrait. Unfortunately, the second impression that I got when coming out of this book was that Anthony Powell was a monster, an absolutely horrible person for most of his life to most of the people in it. So at every turn, in every chapter, at every stage of his life, in every anecdote, I kept thinking, oh, okay, well, you presented that scene really well, and Powell came off really well in that scene, but it's easy to read that scene without knowing anything else than what you've told me. It's easy to read that scene in a way in which it doesn't reflect well on him. I mean, if you see what I mean, the kinds of thoughts that I had while I was reading this book were totally different from the ones I had reading this one. With this one, with the William Penn, I felt like, okay, I'm in perfectly good hands. You are going to tell me exactly what's what. And you're going to, if there are controversies or alternate readings of anything, you're going to tell me what they are. And this book was incredibly lively, incredibly readable, but I never got that impression. I never, all the way to the end of the book, I could easily suspect Hilary Sperling of hiding something that would really hurt her author. And that's really, really bad to think about a biography, to have that impression about a biographer when you're reading a book. And I could be wrong, but that's the impression I got when reading this. I will keep it, definitely, because I will certainly want to reread it. But I think I will most likely be prompted to reread this when a different biography comes out. I think there's still room for a really big, in fact, bigger than this, but more objective, more balanced, more critical biography of this particular person. So I could be wrong about all of that because I don't know enough about Pohl to know one way or another. But that's the feeling that I had. I would certainly be able to recommend it to you. For instance, if you saw it in the new shelf of your library, I would certainly be able to recommend it to you as a lively book and as a lively, really readable account of the literary world for the decades. The English literary world, Pohl's life covered decades of it. There are tons of anecdotes and tons of great character sketches from that world. So if that's your catnip, and I admit it's mine, I absolutely love stuff like that, you're going to want to read this book. I'd be curious to know if you're going to feel the same tug of suspicion that I did throughout. But those are 3 books that I recently read. Now I want to show you 3 books that I am going to read, starting with one that I know is going to break my heart. I've had the advanced copy for a while. I've been waiting for the finished copy, and I don't know that I'm going to get the finished copy, and it's an October release, so I want to read it in month, because God knows what horrors November will bring, although November doesn't seem to be shaping up. This October 2018 was one of the most bursting publishing months that I have seen since I've been back in reviewing. November looks to be normal. I could be wrong about that. That's classic last words. But this is by Catherine Gillespie, and it is The Cow with ear tag number 1389. And it's about the author decides to trace the life of one livestock cow. One of the lucky ones, one of the incredibly lucky ones, despite the fact that this cow led a nightmare existence. This particular cow ended up in an animal sanctuary. And she ended up as an old cow, lovingly tended, in an animal sanctuary, spending most of her day laying down on grass in bright sunlight. And the author doesn't need to stress the point that 99.9% of cows don't get that. So, and that is the only way that most of those 99.9% of cows die in squalor, pain, and misery, and fear, totally anonymously. This particular cow was rescued after a great deal of pain and misery, and brought to a place where she could live out the rest of her life without fear. She doesn't like humans. In this particular sanctuary, she's extremely wary of humans, and who wouldn't be? But that's all plot. I haven't actually read the book to find out what this author has to tell us about the whole horrors, just the unrelieved horrors of these animals' existence. I know those horrors inside and out, but I'm going to read this book anyway, because it could be powerfully done. It could be non-cheap, non-manipulative. One way or another, I will read it anyway. And then the other two that are on my docket are both fiction. And the first one is by Wendy Webb, and it is Daughters of the Lake. Lovely cover there, and I don't know anything about this. It's by Lake Union Publishing. I've been impressed by a lot of their books, and I want to read you just a bit about it, just to see if it catches your interest the way it did mine. This book is another jewel in Wendy's crown. 2 heartbroken protagonists do everything they can to reach across generations and set right the betrayals of long ago. In the wake of a marriage torn apart by infidelity, protagonist Kate Granger has retreated to her parents' home on Lake Superior to pull herself together. Not long after arriving, she discovers the body of a murdered woman washed into the shallows. Tucked into the folds of the woman's curiously vintage gown is an infant, as cold and at peace as its mother. No one can identify the woman except for Kate, who dares not tell anyone how she recognizes her. She's seen her before, but only in her dreams. 100 years ago, a love story ended in tragedy, its mysteries left unsolved, It's time for the lake to give up its secrets. As each mystery unravels, it pulls Kate deeper into the eddy of haunting folktale that has been handing down in whispers over generations. And the general comment of the pub sheet is that Wendy Webb has earned her title as the inimitable queen of a genre dubbed Northern Gothic. Her intricately crafted novels, set eerily against the misty backdrop of the Great Lakes, are marked by a masterful balance of atmospheric paranormality with authentic, relatable characters. So Northern Gothic, it's kind of Gothic tales set around the Great Lakes region, which is fascinating in its own right. And I liked how this one began too. I don't know this author. I think she wrote a book that wasn't. She wrote a book called The End of Temperance Dare. I seem to remember that being a sort of a book club favorite, getting some talk. But this one starts with, it was finally time for the lake to give her up. That's a terrific line. So I'll be reading this and seeing what Gothic noir has, what Northern Gothic has to give me. And then the next one, the last book we'll deal with for today is YA. And this book it's a debut, which I love, and it's been showered with praise. So I'm going to give it a try. It's by Sorbonne Banerjee, and it's called Hide With Me. And let me read you a little bit about it here. In the dying cornfields of his family's farm, 17-year-old Cade finds a girl broken and bleeding. She has one request for him: hide me. So begins the gripping debut novel from writer and award-winning television news reporter Sorbonne Banerjee. Banerjee has crafted a compelling narrative with real, gritty characters experiencing a range of experiences. Could have been better put. She tackles the issue of the drug trafficking movement in the southern United States through the lens of a teenage girl struggling to survive. At the same time, Hide With Me is also a story of trust and heart-pounding experience of first love. Sounds like a slightly overcooked YA entry, but I'm all for it. I despite despite how harsh I can be on the genre, I actually like well done YA. We'll see if this constitutes it. So that's it. That is Wednesday Reads for today. We have William Penn. This is definitely a strong recommend, but you probably have to be interested. This isn't one of those biography recommends that I sometimes make where I say it doesn't matter whether or not you're interested, you're going to love it. It's scholarly, it's comprehensive, it's probably for you if you're interested in the time period, in William Penn himself, and that sort of thing. And then Hilary Spurling's Life of Anthony Poe, which may go down in biography history as a classic of the genre, but it won't be the same area of the genre as this William Penn book. It will be more along the lines of chatty, pointed, partisan insider biographies, which can be, I'm sure if you've read some, you'll agree with me, they can be God's own fun to read. And then we have The Cow with ear tag 1389, the life story of a livestock cow. We have Hide With Me, a debut YA novel. We have Daughters of the Lake by Wendy Webb. First, I'm encountering this author, and we'll see what Northern Gothic has to offer me. And we have Snowfall on Lighthouse Lane by Joanne Ross, which I really liked. It was quite different from my usual drama-soaked Regencies. It didn't have a whole lot of that. Instead, it was much more along the lines of life in a small town. But that has its charms too. I see where these novels get such dedicated fan bases. So that's it. That is Wednesday Reads for now. We'll see if I make a Thursday Reads. I'm not sure that I should. But one way or another, I'll wrap this up, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.